What happens when a neighborhood cop crosses a line, threatening the wrong person? Ethan never imagined that his quiet life would shatter the moment his son, a special forces operative, became the target of an overzealous HOA enforcer. But when the gun was drawn, the tables turned and the HOA was about to pay the price. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. Ethan had always believed that a quiet suburban life was the best reward after years of serving his country in the military. He had earned it time to unwind, spend time with his family, and embrace the peace that came with retirement. He spent most of his days in the garden, sipping coffee, and enjoying the warmth of the sun, while his son James, who had just returned from an overseas mission, often came by to visit. James, though only in his mid-30s, had lived a lifetime of experiences. As a special forces operative, he had trained for the worst and had seen things no one should ever witness. He'd witnessed death, destruction, and chaos in places few ever went. But now, he was back in his hometown, laying low, looking for normalcy in an ordinary world. The neighbors didn't know what James did for a living. To them, he was just another young man who occasionally came to visit his dad. The local HOA, on the other hand, had a different idea of what normal looked like. The president of the HOA, a man named Brad, was a power-hungry, self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood rules. Every little infraction seemed to bother him, and he had a particular disdain for Ethan's property. The lawn, in Brad's eyes, was never neat enough. The trash cans were occasionally left out too long. And, most of all, Brad couldn't stand that Ethan's car, a slightly older model, was parked too close to the curb. He'd been making passive-aggressive remarks about it for weeks. One afternoon, Brad decided it was time to address his grievances head-on. He marched over to Ethan's house, clipboard in hand, looking more like a sheriff than a neighbor. His chest puffed out with authority as he approached. Ethan, who was tending to his garden, looked up with a weary smile. Brad wasted no time in launching into his tirade about the car, the lawn, and a dozen other minor offenses. Ethan, ever the calm and patient man, listened politely, trying to de-escalate the situation. He knew that arguing with someone like Brad was futile, and he wasn't interested in any more conflict. However, Brad wasn't satisfied with just the complaints. He pushed harder, demanding Ethan comply with every little rule, even as Ethan tried to explain that he'd always followed the HOA guidelines. James, sitting on the porch, could feel the tension building between his father and Brad. Something didn't sit right with him. Brad's tone had shifted from rude to condescending, and now he was speaking down to his father in a way that James couldn't ignore. His military instincts kicked in. As much as he wanted to avoid a confrontation, he knew this was escalating into something dangerous. He stood up, walked toward the porch, and made his presence known, hoping to defuse the situation without making it worse. But Brad, seeing James step forward, misinterpreted his calm demeanor. He assumed James was challenging him and that his authority was being questioned. The situation turned tense in an instant. Brad's eyes narrowed as he saw James' tall, muscular frame and the quiet confidence with which he carried himself. It made Brad nervous, and when he felt his power slipping away, he made a rash decision. Without warning, Brad reached for his gun, a small pistol holstered at his side. He yanked it out and pointed it at James, shouting at him to back off. The entire neighborhood seemed to freeze as Brad's hand trembled. The gun aimed directly at James. The neighbors, some of whom were witnessing the situation from their windows, stared in shock. Ethan's heart pounded, his protective instincts rising to the surface. He knew that any wrong move could set off a violent chain of events. But James, remarkably composed, didn't flinch. His eyes never left Brad's, and he took a slow step forward. "You don't know who you're dealing with," James said, his voice low but firm. Brad scoffed, thinking it was some sort of bluff. He couldn't possibly know who James was or what he was capable of. "Step back," Brad ordered, his voice shaky but full of authority. Ethan stepped between his son and Brad, his years of military training kicking in. The protective father inside him surged forward, but the soldier inside him kept him calm. He met Brad's gaze, and in a steady voice, he said, "My son is a special forces operative. You're threatening the wrong person." Brad's face turned pale as he processed the information. He stammered, trying to justify his actions, claiming he was just trying to enforce the rules. But the damage was done. The entire neighborhood had been watching, and many of them had already begun to understand the gravity of the situation. Brad had not just threatened a man in his own home. He had threatened someone who had served his country with honor and who had the training to handle life or death situations. The word quickly spread that James wasn't just a neighbor, but a hero with a decorated military career. The HOA, under pressure from the growing backlash, called an emergency meeting. Some members of the HOA defended Brad, claiming that he had been trying to maintain order in the neighborhood. Others, however, saw that his actions were an overstep. The public pressure mounted as James' story spread, and soon, people who had once supported the HOA began to question its leadership. At the emergency meeting, Ethan and James confronted the board. They demanded an apology not only for their family but for the entire neighborhood. They also made it clear that Brad's actions were unacceptable, and that he should never again be in a position of power. The whole board, realizing the extent of the mistake, voted to suspend Brad. However, for Ethan and James, that wasn't enough. They knew that public accountability was crucial, and they demanded a public apology. Brad, who had always been proud of his position, now found himself a pariah. His reputation, once that of a neighborhood enforcer, crumbled in a matter of days. The neighbors' reactions were mixed at first. Some were supportive of Ethan and James, recognizing the injustice of what had happened. Others, loyal to the HOA, still defended Brad, but as the days went by and the full story was uncovered, the majority of the neighborhood began to side with the family. The HOA had lost its authority, and many residents began questioning the need for such an invasive, overbearing organization. In the weeks that followed, the HOA was forced to issue a formal public apology, and Brad's position was permanently revoked. The organization went through restructuring, and many of the stricter, more unreasonable rules were either relaxed or abolished altogether. James, though a decorated hero, never sought the limelight. He was simply glad that justice had been served. But to the neighborhood, he became a symbol of standing up for what was right, even when facing authority. Ethan, too, felt a sense of relief. His son had not only protected him but had also stood up for the entire community. The neighborhood had learned the importance of respect for others, respect for personal boundaries, and most importantly, respect for the courage that was often hidden in plain sight. Though life returned to its quiet rhythm in the neighborhood, things would never quite be the same. The residents now understood that standing up to the wrongs of those in power wasn't just necessary, it could lead to real change.